All right, let's jump right into a biological mystery that turns pretty much everything we know about cancer completely on its head. Welcome to This Explainer. Our journey today starts at Lake Memphremagog. It's this idyllic 50-kilometer stretch of water that spans all the way from northern Vermont up into southern Quebec. It's a stunning location, and honestly, it's famous for its great fishing, massive lake trout, salmon, and abundant brown bullhead catfish. But just beneath the surface of this pristine lake, a really bizarre and completely unprecedented scientific anomaly is unfolding. To truly grasp the sheer scale of this mystery, you really have to look at this statistic. 33%. That means literally 1 out of every 3 brown bullhead catfish in this entire lake is afflicted with a highly aggressive disease. You know, when an anomaly hits a full third of a natural population, it's no longer just some rare curiosity. It's a massive biological alarm bell. The numbers had local anglers and state wildlife officials incredibly concerned, and rightfully so. And we aren't talking about a few weird scales here. These fish are being totally overrun by these chaotic, inky black spots. When state fish pathologists finally managed to put some of these samples under a microscope, they found that these pigment-rich cells were actually signaling a severe, aggressive melanoma. So the immediate burning question for everyone involved was, what on earth is triggering a localized outbreak of this magnitude? Well, let's look at suspect 1, toxic pollution. When you're investigating an environmental crime scene, you naturally look for the most obvious culprit first. A local residents group known as DUMP, which stands for Don't Undermine Memphremagog's Purity, raised a huge red flag about a nearby landfill, fearing it might be leaking contaminants directly into the water. And, their suspicions actually had a lot of merit. Fish pathologist Vicki Blazer investigated and found low levels of PFS, those notoriously carcinogenic forever chemicals, in the fish's blood. Even more concerning, they found unusually high levels of arsenic, which was causing severe cellular inflammation. So the working theory? This pollution was just destroying the catfish's immune resistance, holding the door wide open for a cancer outbreak. But then, the investigation took a wild turn. Suspect 2, a contagious clone. When geneticists from the University of Vermont decided to look directly at the DNA of the cancer itself, they uncovered a twist literally nobody saw coming. This wasn't standard cancer. Typical cancer, as we know it, is an abnormal growth of a host's own tissue. This, however, was a transmissible cancer. It isn't the fish's own cells going rogue. Actually, think of it more like a completely separate parasitic organism physically colonizing the fish. It acts as a single giant malignant clone spreading from host to host. To understand just how groundbreaking this discovery is, we have to realize how incredibly rare this phenomenon is in nature. Before this, scientists only knew of a tiny handful of contagious cancers in the entire animal kingdom. We're talking about the notorious face-eating tumor in Tasmanian devils that spreads through biting, a specific venereal tumor in dogs, and a transmissible leukemia found in certain clams and mussels. This New England outbreak marks the very first time a contagious cancer has ever been found in a fish. This brings us to a massive eureka moment from data scientist Julie Dragon. By analyzing the variations in DNA from both the tumors and the healthy tissue, she built out these complex genetic family trees, and her conclusion was just stunning. She noted all the tumors clustered together and all the hosts clustered together. What that means is the tumors absolutely did not match the DNA of the fish they were attached to. Every single tumor out there shared one single separate origin. So right now, we are looking at a massive scientific debate. Is the root cause a toxic environment, or is it this rogue genetic clone? In this explainer, we aren't taking sides, but it's fascinating to see how the scientific community is grappling with these two compelling pieces of evidence. On one side, you have the environmental theory, clearly supported by physical cellular changes and arsenic levels. On the other side, the genetic theory, backed by this undeniable DNA clustering that points to a spreading clone. Let's zoom in on the environmental perspective for a second. Fish pathologist Vicki Blazer offers a really crucial word of caution, stating she isn't on board yet with the transmissible tumor. She argues it's entirely possible that pollution simply abets the transmissible cancer by severely lowering the fish's resistance. And it's an excellent point, right? Even if a clone exists, we absolutely shouldn't exonerate water pollution. Environmental stress might be the exact catalyst making the fish vulnerable enough to catch it in the first place. Conversely, some experts are looking strictly at the genetic data. Biologist Michael Metzger argues unequivocally, saying there isn't really any other explanation for the genetic results. It is a clone, a single clone that's spreading through the population. For many geneticists, that tight clustering of the DNA leaves zero question about its clonal, transmissible nature, regardless of whatever environmental conditions might be at play. Which brings us to the next fascinating layer of this story, a biological cold case. As researchers desperately tried to figure out where this clone even came from, they uncovered something astonishing. This thing has actually been traveling the Northeast for centuries. The famed American writer Henry David Thoreau was observing a brown bullhead in a Massachusetts stream way back in 1858. And his description? He noted the fish was covered with an inky black kind of leprosy, like a crustaceous lichen. Without even knowing it, Thoreau was essentially acting as an accidental pathologist, perfectly describing the exact same melanoma we are seeing today. When you track this historically, it turns a bunch of isolated, weird observations into a groundbreaking modern discovery. It starts in 1858 with Thoreau. Then, decades later, in 1925, a zoologist reports widespread black tumors in a pond down in Cape Cod. Fast forward to 2012, and Vermont anglers are raising the alarm on Lake Memphremagog. Finally, in 2026, genetic mapping reveals the undeniable truth. The cancer is a contagious clone. It is literally a biological cold case cracked well over a century later. But having a culprit doesn't mean we have all the answers. Let's look at the unsolved mysteries. The biggest question staring researchers right in the face is, how does this giant malignant clone actually jump from fish to fish? The cancer invades internal organs without immediately killing its host, which allows the fish to continue swimming around and, crucially, spreading the clone far and wide. But the exact physical mechanism of that spread, it remains a total mystery. We do have one major clue, though. The cancer is completely absent in young fish. It only becomes rampant after they reach sexual maturity, which is usually around 3 years old. Since catfish are generally pretty solitary creatures, mating is one of the very few times they actually interact with each other. This has led to the rather wild hypothesis that the catfish might be transferring these malignant cells by physically scratching each other with the sharp spines behind their pectoral fins during mating. But scientists aren't ruling anything out just yet. Could these cancer cells possibly be spreading as a waterborne pathogen? To answer this, researchers are right now designing experiments where they place healthy and afflicted fish together in laboratory tanks. They really want to test if the clone can somehow detach, travel freely through the water column itself, and infect a brand new host without any direct physical contact whatsoever. And that brings us to what is easily the most unsettling part of this entire explainer. Genetic mapping recently showed that the cancer's genome actually matches healthy fish from New Hampshire and Maine way more closely than the fish from the Vermont lake where this massive outbreak occurred. It traveled. It came from somewhere else, which leaves us with one final, very provocative thought. If a contagious parasitic cancer has been silently swimming through our lakes and rivers for over a century, what other bizarre, ancient, transmissible diseases are out there in the wild right now, just waiting to be discovered?